face when he saw the gap.
Fucking goddamn fucking
Shit! Why did I say that? Why did I even bother? Where the hell am I gonna go now? No! Hey everyone, how's it going? I've been having a blast still with the wheel and have also gotten into GTA V sessions once again. The former is me doing a lot of drifting, and the other is playing GTA V as much as possible before 6 comes into the world. It's my most hyped title that's upcoming and has been a 10-year wait and longer at this stage. But on the flip side, it means I get to invest more time into GTA V, into new experiences, mucking around with favourite games, and trying out games from the past that I've yet to experience. As before, the past can be hit and miss too, even in spite of the nostalgic connection that a lot of us have with the 90s and 2000s era of gaming. For me personally, the 2000s was where a lot of my best memories and moments came from, and quite a few of them came from the racing genre. I'm still keeping my nose on the latest games that interest me, whatever genre, indie or AAA, it doesn't matter. But also, I'm going backwards to see what else I've missed, and I've got one title that often goes under the radar in the Capcom library. Capcom are known for some of the most iconic franchises out there, but aren't often seen as a powerhouse in the racing genre, and while they have made some notable titles throughout their history, it's evident that they have had more success in other genres. One game that I had a look at that was considered underrated is one that still holds up really well graphically, but not so much in other departments. Modellista. Modellista is a game that seemed to be a more arcadey version of Gran Turismo, at least that's what the similarities seem to be, coming from anyways, where you had a decent selection of cars, a good amount of tuning options with dynamic tracks to accommodate for your setup, but with cel-shaded graphics. In contrast to a lot of other racing games that opted for more realistic graphics, Modellista was in a opposite direction, so to speak, having a more stylistic approach to the graphics, which made it stand out in its own way. In Japan, the game was somewhat mixed in its reception and didn't quite meet the expectations that Capcom had hoped for, and the game's handling system made it a bit too easy for people that did play it. When they shipped it to the West, they made adjustments to that handling system, making it a lot different and more challenging out of the worry that players would get bored too quickly with the experience. As a result, you now have two different versions of the game, with the original being available in Japan and Europe, and the US tuned version in the West, alongside some American cars added into the roster. I only found this out after trying out the US tuned version, but I was too invested to care about going through it all over again in the original, so this video will mainly be about the US version that I played and not so much about the original. So let's dig a little bit, shall we? Modellista was a title that had style added into it, and it's reflected on the cover and in the gameplay. From the get-go, you'll notice the cel-shaded graphical approach that had made the game somewhat timeless. It's not unlike the way Jet Set Radio presents itself, which was a game that frustrated me to no end in terms of its movement and its camera setup, but did impress me with how well its art style holds up to this day. Modellista still has that same benefit and looks great for a 2002 game on the 6th gen consoles. And this was in a period where the graphics were getting better each year, going from titles like, Midnight Club Street Racing, which was a launch title, to titles like Gran Turismo 4 within a couple of years, where, the graphical difference is like night and day. The art style of the game enabled Capcom to develop a unique identity for the game that would make it age better even decades later, and it's one of the best things about this game, its art style. The cars themselves look great, and the maps still have that old school racing charm, even though it's aged worse than the cars themselves. While photorealistic graphics are appreciated and could suit some games a lot better, it's refreshing to have a game that goes for its own art style rather than joining the rest of the flock. It was one of the best positives that the game had to offer, but I just wish some of the other aspects matched the quality of its well put together graphics and art style. Modellista is a game that has a lot to show on the surface, but when you dig into the content itself, it's rather a dry experience with not a lot to offer. Let's start with the good stuff first. The car selection is quite good, and you have a good range of Japanese car brands with some others from other places and American cars if you're playing the US version. Most of the car brands have a range of old classics to modern cars of the early 2000s, and, when you put them all together, the range of cars you have available to you is quite extensive. The cars themselves have their strengths and their weaknesses, but if you're a car enthusiast, you will at least find one car that you will enjoy. Like Gran Turismo, the game also has tuning that you can really get into if you're, into that sort of thing, and having some background knowledge on each of the parts that make up a car will make a huge difference in your efforts to win the races. But unlike the Gran Turismo games of this game's time, you have more visual customization to play around with and even an option to create your own stickers, a feature that was ahead of its time and would be improved on in later titles. If you have a creative mindset, you can create some nice looking cars, or at the very least, some interesting looking ones. And the fun doesn't stop there either. You can also customize your own garage, unlocking props and other objects through the races you complete in the career mode. Speaking of the career mode, it's very simple and straight to the point. You have levels that contain a number of races, but you have a criteria that needs to be met in order to unlock the next level. Completing all of the races unlocks you new parts, secret cars, and other things for your car and garage. There's no story whatsoever, and there's not really a setting here. It's really just a dry as fuck pond version of Gran Turismo, which is where the negatives come in finally. The content itself and the overall gameplay. When you look at the amount of maps and remember the amount of cars offered here, it feels like a short change has occurred. See, the game itself is really short in terms of the map pool and the career progression. You don't get a lot of maps to play with. You get like 2 mountain tracks, a few highways, some other Tokyo Osaka-like roads, and 1 racetrack, and also a racetrack where you race smaller cars. When you tally up the number of tracks, including the ones with different conditions, whether it's like dry or wet, or if it has dirt, or if it's just a regular road track, there's not really a lot to offer when you really think about it. Sure, when you look at other games like Gran Turismo, there were way more cars than maps, but you still had a good chunk of maps to pick from, whereas in this game, you really don't. For a game that looks really good for 2002, it's honestly disappointing that it doesn't give you that many maps to race around in, it doesn't give you that much to do, let alone race variety too. And pretty soon, as you experiment with different cars, you'll be playing the same content, same maps over and over again, doing the same kind of races. This in effect gives the game a pretty short lifespan, and when I finished the career mode, I didn't really have much of a reason to do anything else, and I didn't care enough to do more of the unlocking because I was pretty much ready to just move on afterwards. As for the handling itself, I can only speak for the US tuned version, and this version is not very good. I understand that the difficulty mindset is somewhat rooted in the past, where Japanese studios would release harder versions of their games to the US to appease them, so to speak, but this was not the best way to do it. From what I read, the original had snappier driving and you wouldn't lose too much speed when attacking corners, giving it more of an arcade-like experience. But in this version, your car slides very quickly and is very sensitive when turning. This means that it's very easy to lose speed, even when applying the slow in, fast out method with turns during the races, while other cars aren't affected and will always have a head start in the race no matter what. As a result, you have to not abuse the handling too much and tune your car right just to have a chance and upgrade it as well, just to be able to catch up easier. I did have some trouble in some races due to not being fast enough and not tuning the car properly, but over time I would eventually overcome that and it wouldn't be an issue anymore. And once I had the Skyline and maxed out its performance, tuned it towards gripping and acceleration, I practically broke and beat the game. Even the final races that you unlock were really easy to do. You can get by with any car really, and hell, you can even do engine swaps if you want to, but I never really saw the point in doing this since I was already doing more than fine with the Skyline. When the game was finished, there were still unlocks, yeah, but like I said, I really didn't care that much to 100% everything, and 100%ing a game is something I only really do when I really enjoy a game. Modellista isn't a bad game, it's just a pretty underwhelming game when you factor in the not so good handling model, at least in the US tune version. I can't really speak for the original, and the relatively small map pool that you have to race in. It has some good music, and you can even do your own remixes, like adding stuff to the game's existing music, doing your own spins on it, as well as a replay system if you care about it that much. The car selection and the customization is pretty good, and the art style is awesome. It's honestly the best thing about this game. Those factors alone justify a chance to try out the game for yourself, but if you're expecting longevity and plenty of content to go through, then you're going to be disappointed here like I was. The game, even with its crappy handling, was still not that challenging once you know how to tune a car for the event, or just use the easy tune setup if you're lazy. I'm glad that I did give Modellista a chance, but for all of its positives, the most important aspects that it needed to get right just didn't do well enough for me to return to it again. I won't be coming back to this game again and will only mention it in passing in other subjects whenever it's relevant. But do give the game a try though, it is at the very least worth playing. and is a good example of how art style matters more than graphics in the long run. Thanks for watching.